When you think of Zen, what comes to mind? Probably things like tranquility, meditation, right? Peace. But what if I told you there's a hidden, much darker side to that story? A history where Zen masters actually preached that war and killing could be a path to enlightenment. It sounds impossible, but let's dive into this really complex and pretty disturbing story. So, this whole thing really starts with one man, Brian Dyson Victoria, the author of the book Zen at War. Back in 1970, he was a Zen priest in Japan, and he was actively protesting the Vietnam War. Well, his superior, a chief abbot, pulled him aside and gave him an ultimatum: stop the anti war stuff or you're out of the priesthood. And the reason he gave? Zen priests don't get involved in politics. You can imagine, that single conversation sent him into a total personal crisis. I mean, how could a religion that's all about peace threaten to kick out a priest for protesting a war? That question just wouldn't let him go. It sent Victoria on this massive 25-year journey, digging through the history of his own faith. And what he found was the complete opposite of what that abbot told him. It wasn't a history of staying out of politics. It was a history of active, passionate support for Japanese militarism. And what he uncovered wasn't subtle at all. It was incredibly explicit, and it came from the very top. We're talking about some of the most revered Zen masters and scholars, figures whose names are still held in high regard today. Okay, check out who said this. This is from D.T. Suzuki. If you've heard of Zen in the West, it's pretty much because of this guy. And here he is, arguing that the number one job of religion is to serve the state. He goes on to say Japan should go punish unruly heathens. He was talking about the Chinese, and do it in the name of religion. Just wow. And believe it or not, it gets even more direct. This was from Zen master Harada Sogoku, another major figure. He makes this absolutely chilling connection. He says that when you're on the battlefield, just obeying orders, marching, shooting, that is enlightenment. He literally calls it a manifestation of the highest wisdom and talks about the unity of Zen and war in a holy war. So you see, this wasn't just a few rogue masters. It was a full-blown ideology. Scholars have a name for it now: Imperial State Zen. The core idea was to take a central concept in Zen, selflessness, or the idea of no self, and twist it. It came to mean giving up your individual will entirely, and instead just becoming a tool for the emperor and the military. Your self disappears into the will of the nation. So when Victoria finally published all these findings, it wasn't just some dusty academic book that sat on a shelf. This book didn't just document history, it actually made history. It forced modern Zen institutions to look in the mirror and confront their own past. And this timeline just lays it all out. You can see the direct impact, clear as day. The Soto sect had already started to repent a bit before the book came out in English. But look what happens after the Japanese edition is published in 2001. Two major branches of Rinzai Zen, Myoshinji and Tenryuji, issue their first ever formal apologies for what they did during the war. And they specifically said Victoria's book was the reason why. Now, these revelations didn't just lead to apologies. They kicked off this deep philosophical firestorm that's still raging today, especially for Zen practitioners in the West. It gets to a really fundamental question: what even is enlightenment? And these two quotes just perfectly capture the heart of the debate. On one hand, you've got this American Zen master, Bernie Glassman. He basically says, look, if you think enlightenment means you're free of bigotry, you need a new definition. He thinks enlightenment is so big it can contain everything, even the ugly stuff. But then you have English Buddhist David Brazier, who comes back hard and says, nope, my definition of enlightenment has absolutely no room for hate, and neither did the Buddha's. And this isn't just some abstract argument. How you answer that question changes everything. It fundamentally shapes what people who practice Zen are even trying to achieve. Are they aiming for a state that's beyond good and evil, or one that is, by its very nature, compassionate and ethical? The stakes are incredibly high. As shocking as this hidden Zen history is, it's so important to understand that this isn't just a Zen problem. Not at all. This pattern of faith getting tangled up with nationalism and state power to justify violence, it's something you see across religions, all throughout history. Just take a look at this. It's a cable from a U.S. general to President Teddy Roosevelt in 1906. He's reporting on a massacre of 600 Filipino Muslims, including women and children. And he doesn't just call it a victory. He calls it the greatest victory that was ever achieved by the Christian soldiers of the United States. And Roosevelt's response? He praised it as a brilliant feat of arms. So that's really the key takeaway, isn't it? The specific words change. One calls it a holy war, another calls it a victory for Christian soldiers, but the dynamic is exactly the same. This danger of religion being twisted to make violence seem righteous, it's a disease that can infect any faith. No one is immune. It really leaves us with a final, pretty haunting question. When faith and violence merge, when the call to war starts to sound like a sacred duty, who really ends up paying the price? Well, as this history shows us, the bell doesn't just toll for them, it tolls for all of us.